So, Mr. Conter, if you could start off by just saying and spelling your first and last name.
Louis Conter, Louis Conter.
Thank you very much. So, can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised?
I was born in, excuse me, I was born in Ojibwa, Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, at home in a little piece of ground my dad and uncle built a cabin on for my mother, and my older sister was born there too. And then in 1923, my younger sister was ready to be born, and Dad was hired by the government to be a system foreman for a road being put through from Gallup, New Mexico east, which is Highway 66, I think it is. And so we took off from Wisconsin in a 1916 Lexington touring car and went down through Kansas and stopped in Goodland, Kansas for 10 days while my young sister was born. And we drove on over Wolf Creek Pass. Took us 3 days to go over Wolf Creek Pass those days, into Durango, Colorado, and on down to Gallup, and out to Thoreau, New Mexico. And we stayed at Thoreau for 2 years, living in tents on the Navajo Indian Reservation there. We had one tent that had dynamite in it, and we had 40 headed mules with quarter-yard Fresnos that the men would dynamite the rocks out, and then the mules, the team would pick up move the rocks over to the roadway and everything, and which they now do with D8 cats and carryalls and things. But and we had one tent that there was the dining room, and the cook, my mother and my aunt, cooked for 40 men. They lived in another part of the camp there in tents, 3 meals a day, and we lived, my 2 sisters and myself lived, my dad and mother lived in another tent, winter and summer. And my little sister was 5.5 years old, getting ready. My dad says, "We're quitting this job and going back to Denver because I want my kids to go to school." So we went back to Denver, and
I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
went back to Denver and stayed there 2 years. We went down to the farm in Kansas with my aunt and uncle, Stockton, Kansas. We had 320 acres there, and we worked the cattle and sheep and everything. I'd come home in the 1st and 2nd grade when my mother would say, well, she was baking some potatoes or cooking potatoes. Lou, you better go, Louis, she always called me Louis. You better go out and shoot a couple of rabbits. And so I was 7 years old. I'd go out and shoot a couple of rabbits and dress them out and bring them in and have the rabbits cooked in the potatoes for gravy for dinner. And then in 1930, we went back to Denver, and that's where we stayed outside of Denver. We're on a 20-acre farm out there. We went to market 3:34 in the morning in the summer, but in wintertime we walked to school. No school buses in those days. We had 4.6 miles to school, and from 64th Avenue into Holy Family and into my junior year in high school. In 37, we moved into 38. We moved into Benton Street, which was only a mile and a half from high school, so I only had a mile and a half to walk for the last 2 years. But I went out for football in the high school because we didn't have any running water at home or anything. And after football practice, go into the shower. So then I walked 4.6 miles home. But it was all right, made it out all right. And then I joined the Navy after high school, graduated from high school, Wheatridge High School outside of Denver, Colorado, and went in the Navy there.
Was there a legacy of military service in your family? Did anybody else serve?
No, my uncle was in World War I, but that was all. My dad was exempt from World War I subway. Go ahead. And it's just one of those things in those days was all. And there was a neighbor of ours, Wicks, that joined the Navy in 1935. He was a signalman, third-class signalman on the Nevada, USS Nevada. And he came home. In those days, you'd come home for 90 days before you had to sign up again for another 4 years, ship over. And he signed up, and he came home, and so we were all sitting around there, and he says, "Come on, you guys, go down with me." I was working at Swifting Company from 3:30 to 11, and he said, "I got to sign up." So we went down, and of course the Navy recruiters grabbed us and said, "There's a 9-month waiting list, so why don't you take the exam?" So we all took the exam, passed it, and forgot about it. I went home and went back to Swift overnight at 3:30, and I was in bed one morning at 8 o'clock. I didn't get home till 12:30. My mother came up and said, "Are you in trouble, Louis?" And I said, "No, why?" And she said, "Well, somebody's asking for you on the phone, Louis Anthony Conter." So I went down. We only had one phone down in the dining room, so I went down and answered it. It was the Navy Department. And they said, "We're 6 members short for our draft tonight at 5:45, and we got to fill it up. Would you like to come out and talk to us?" So I said, "Okay, I don't have to go to work till 3:30. So I went down and talked to them, and they talked me into signing up for 4 years and leaving that night at 5:45. So I called my mother, and I called my girlfriend, and I called my dad at work. He worked at Swifting Company. And I went down and picked up my check, because we got paid every week in a check. We were getting 30 cents an hour at Swifting Company. So 40 hours a week is about $12 a week. So we got a $10 bill and 2 $1 bills in an envelope every week. And I got my $12, and 5:45 that night I was on train for San Diego, and that's how I started. So
How old were you at that time?
18.
18.
We could sign up. We could sign up for 4 years without any parent signature or anything at 18. 17, you had to get your parent signature.
And what year was that?
1939.
Okay. So you told us when you just joined. Were you initially stationed at Pearl Harbor, or was that?
No. When I got up 3 months of boot camp, San Diego, we were 4 or 5 of us from that division was sent to Long Beach. All of the ships were anchored in Long Beach then, the Navy in San Diego and Seattle and San Francisco. And we went to board the Arizona 1st of January of 1940. And April 1st, the whole fleet went for maneuvers outside of south of Honolulu, south of the Hawaiian Islands. Then that was April 1st of 40. We first hit Oahu and Maui and Lahaina roads. We finished the maneuvers, and Washington decided that it was going to keep the fleet in Pearl. And so that's when we went into Pearl Harbor and stayed, and moved out of Seattle and San Francisco, Long Beach, and San Diego. And so the whole fleet was there. So then after that, we operated half the fleet out, half the battleships. At that time we had battleships. We had 4 carriers. We had 8 battleships out there. We'd have whole division, 3 battleship, like our division, battleship division number 1. We had the Oklahoma, Nevada, and Arizona. And then others had the West Virginia, California, and Maryland. And in them. And each one had a rear admiral as commander battleship division. And when I first went aboard the Arizona, Captain Isaac C. Kidd was our skipper. And then he left, and Captain Train came aboard. And then he left, and Captain Van Valkenburg came aboard. And Admiral Kidd came back as a rear admiral, commander battleship division number 1. And he's still on the ship. He was buried. He was killed December 7th, along with Captain Van Valkenburg. So we stayed out. We never came back. Well, we came back then we crossed the equator in July of 40, and then we went back to Pearl. And then in September, we came back to Bremen, Washington for a 3 months overhaul. I went home in November of 40 for my young sister's wedding, November 30th. And then we got out of Bremen and went back to Pearl Harbor, and we never came back. And so...
Okay. What were your duties on the Arizona initially?
When I first went aboard, Chief picked us up at the quarterdeck, and we came in and saluted and reported for duty with our sea bags and hammocks. At that time, we had hammocks. We slept with hammocks in boot camp, and on the Arizona, we had hooks. We put the hammocks down every day in the hammock thing. And we walked up to Division 2, and he says, "There's your hooks. There's your baggage for hammock bag." So I'll see you on deck in 15 minutes. So I was in 2nd Division, and my battle station was the lower handling room in turret number 2. Because at that time, the 3 14-inch guns, they had round bags, 105 pounds apiece, and they put 4 of them in each barrel to shoot a shell off. They put the shell in first, 1,600 pounds, and they shoved 4 bags in and closed the hatch, and the breech. And so we had over 1 million pounds of powder in the forward lower handling rooms. So I was, we were getting $21 a month, so not too much money. So I was laying up on the hammock netting, studying most of the time for Seaman First Class. I took an exam for Seaman First. I became Seaman Second in about 4 months, and I got $36 a month. So I was Seaman Second Class then, and laid on the hammock. So after a while, Bob Sink, who was the chief quartermaster, came down to me and said, "Lou, I see you're up there studying. You're not going ashore much. You don't have that much money to go ashore. And how would you like to be a quartermaster striker?" And I said, "I'd love to be," because we all knew that the quartermasters were with the officer's deck captain all the time. And they kept the logs, and they were on the bridge, and they were on the quarterdeck. They didn't have to scrub decks. And so it was like an advancement. And so it wasn't a week later that I was transferred from 2nd Division into N Division, which is a navigation division. And I had to learn charts and grids, and maps and charts and grids, and latitude, longitudes, and everything else, because I had to navigate, and star sites. And that's what I did. And and I passed my first exam, 3rd class quartermaster, and 4 months before the Pearl Harbor hit. And at that time, if you got 3rd class before 4 years, you were joining the next 30-month trip to China for ASIAC duty. And so I was, oh my God, I'll probably head up in China. Well, I was on the Arizona football team with B.J. Johnson, and he's gunner's mate 3rd in Division 5. And in September, because half the fleet would go up and half would come in. 4 battleships go up, 4 stay in, or 3 would go out with the cruisers and destroyers and 1 carrier, and the rest of us stay in. And then on a Monday when we come back, we'd stay out, and the other half went to sea, and then we'd come in, because we knew we were preparing for war. And so there was never over half the ships in to port. And so in September, when Johnny said, "Let's go to flight school," and I said, "We can't, Johnny." I said, "We're right arm rates, because the gunner's mate and the quartermaster right arm, and aviation machinists and aviation radiomen and mech were left arm rates." And they were with the planes. And at that time, from 1934 to 44, the Navy took 30 enlisted men out of the fleet. That's out of the whole fleet, Atlantic and Pacific fleet, to go to Pensacola and get your wings. And if you passed it, flight school, and got your wings, you went into a flying status then, and whatever because you had to learn all the carriers and everything in those days, catapults. So anyway, I had met a girl over in Honolulu, Hester Hitchcock. She was a senior at Punahou High School. And heck, I was only 20. She was 17. So she took me in. I met her mother and dad. And finally, after a couple of 3 months, they just gave me one of the bedrooms. And I'd take my sailor uniform on and put a pair of Hawaiian shirt and Hawaiian shorts on. And we'd go to the movie or something. But I have to say that they kept me in good. I didn't run around with all the sailors down at the whorehouses and everything. And I was with Hester, and they fed me, and I'd go back to the base, and it was really good. So anyway, I was over at their house for 1st of September. Went there had for dinner, and Admiral Calhoun came in, who was commander of base force. And he's the one that wrote the orders for Pensacola and everything. And so we were sitting there, and he said, well, Lou, what do you do and everything? Going to college or anything? I said, no, Admiral, I got to tell you, I'm a 3rd-class quartermaster on the USS Arizona. He said, well, that's fine. So I told him about Johnny saying, let's go to flight school. And he said, well, there's nothing law against it. He said, it's just that most of them are with the planes all the time, and nobody else puts in for it. So I said, when you go back to Arizona, take your exam and have your request signed by your executive officer or captain, send it over to me, and I'll see if it passes all right. So I went back to the ship, and I said, Johnny, geez, let's take the test. So we got a hold of Lieutenant Ragsdale, who was our pilot aboard the Arizona, one of our pilots, the senior pilot. And the next time we went to sea, he gave Johnny a ride off number 3 catapult. We were at sea and doing 15, 18 knots into the wind, and shot out, and the first time I'd ever been in an airplane in my life. And so we shot off, went at 5,000 feet, and they spun around and came back. And at that time, the ship would make a hard port turn, and they'd make a big slick there, and they'd throw out a boom, and the plane would come in and land on that slick, and we were in the open sea. And we'd taxi up on a rope mat, and then the pilot would reach over and hold our belt while we stood up, and we grabbed the hook and hook it into the plane. They'd set us back on the catapult. And so we passed that, and we sent the request over to Admiral Calhoun. In November, the first week in November, we got orders to Pensacola, John and I. And I know it was all because knowing Harvey. Hester's father, Harvey Hitchcock, was a graduate engineer of Colgate, and he was vice president of Honolulu Dredging and Hawaiian Construction Company, and he worked for the Navy Department under Admiral Calhoun in Pearl Harbor. And so it was logical. Anyway, we made our reservations to go back the 20th of November on the Lurleen and go on back to Pensacola. Well, Captain Van Valkenburg called us down to his office and said, Johnston, you and Conter are not going back in the Lurleen. And he said, I'm not going to waste $5,000 in Navy money. He said, we're going back December the 19th to Long Beach to pick up our 1.1 guns, so you go back with us and go from there. And those days you said, yes, sir, Captain, and that was it. So we went to sea the last week in November and came back the 5th of December. And on the way in, we were coming into port on a Friday. We were already in on Friday, the 5th. And Admiral Kidd said to Captain Van Valkenburg, we should not be going back into port, period. And but we had to go in. So, of course, the 7th, the Japanese hit 5 minutes to 8 in the morning. And at 9 minutes after 8 or 9 minutes after, I was keeping the log pretty well, but Kurt Haynes, my other quartermaster, went to the bridge with Captain Van Valkenburg and took the logbook with him and everything, and Captain and Admiral Kidd came through right as well. They were heading for the bridges, and Captain Van Valkenburg says, Conter, secure the quarterdeck and come to the bridge. Secure the lines because the Vestal was outboard of us. So the quartermaster went forward to cut the lines forward on the port side, and I pulled the gangplank in, and 8 minutes after 8 or something, then 9 minutes after it started, a plane came across to probably 10, 12,000 feet with a 1,700 pound bomb on it, dropped and got a lucky hit. The bomb hit on the starboard side forward by number 2 turret, on the starboard side of number 2 turret. Went through 5 decks and into the lower handling room, and when it went in the lower handling room, there went 1 million pounds of powder. It blew up, and that's in the pictures you all see of it. And the bow came about 30, 40 feet out of the water, and it was still straight back down. and Bob came out of from the bow, from the fire, after throwing the lines off to the vessel. I cut the lines, and Commander Fuqua, who was our senior officer aboard then, he was our first lieutenant, came up on the quarterdeck, and he was over by number 4, and we got a bomb over there, and he got knocked out for a while. We were over between number 3 turret and the bulkhead, and it didn't hit us, about 4 of us over there. And so he came to and took charge of the whole ship. And he ordered us, the guys were running out of the fire, and it was pretty bad. And said, knock them unconscious if you have to, because if they jump over the side, they'll get burned to death in the fire. So we laid 15 or 16 of them down on the deck there. They were coming out burned. And then about 40 minutes, about 9:30, 8:30 or 9:20, we don't know exactly what time, but around that time, Commander Fuqua said abandon ship, because we just couldn't, it was burning so bad forward and everything else. And the boats were tied up by the dock. We were tied up by the Fox 8 Key, and the Liberty boats were tied up there, the 50-foot motor launches, by the Keys. So we loaded the guys in the launches and to take them to the hospital ship, and we abandoned ship. And for the next 2 days, we fought the fire with the ships, with the boats hauling the hoses in. And on Tuesday, the fire came down a little bit, so we got over the base force and slept for one night. And then we went back, and when the ship cooled down, Pete Huzar was our chief water tender, and he was our chief diver. And about 12, 13 of us went aboard the ship and dove with shallow water helmets. And he dove with a helmet. He could stay down 3 or 4 hours. We'd stay down 30, 45 minutes with a shallow water helmet. The guys pumping air to us on the deck. And after 4 or 5 days of that, why, Pete told Commander Fuqua that it was just too dangerous. We were getting our air hoses caught on the jagged edges of the hatches and everything. So they called it off. And I went to base force, and Johnny was transferred out to a destroyer, and he was third-class gunner's mate, and destroying on a destroyer with gunner's mate. Went out to sea because they thought the Japanese were going to land, and the ships were available. There was only a few of them, and they were out to sea watching the coast. And so that must have been around the 15th, 18th or something, the 20th of December, because I got a call into Harvey that I was okay, and he got a call to my mother just before Christmas of 41, because she'd gotten a telegram I was missing in action, that I was okay, but just because I couldn't call her anything, but he called. And so they called us. So anyway, it's December the 23rd, I remember, going to the hospital and saw a Lightfoot, and he was in pretty bad shape. He was one of our boys, and he died 2 days later. And then Pete and I were transferred up to Honolulu because Captain Geiselman was our executive officer on our ship. He was a full commander, but he made a captain immediately, and they made him provost marshal. And he wanted us up there because we were experienced with 45s and experienced in shore patrol and everything else. And we put out the order that nobody was to be on the streets after sunset or before sunrise. They get shot. And they knew we meant it. And there was nobody that upset that or tried to upset it or demonstrate or anything else. They just lived with it till May of 1945 when it was pulled. So we were with the camp guys went up there, and then so our first Liberty was about the 5th or 6th, first week or something of January of 42. And of course, naturally, I went over to Hester's to see her and her mother and father, and stayed there that night because the first Liberty I'd had in 30 to 40 days. And in walked Admiral Calhoun. And he said, I thought I signed your orders for Pensacola. And I told him what happened. We lost him on the 7th in the Arizona, and Johnny was out at sea in the destroyer. And it wasn't 3 days he had Johnny ordered back into port and me off. And we were on a reservation for the next lurleen back to San Francisco. And on our way back, we had thousands of women and children from military going back to the United States. Remember, that was territory of Hawaii then. It was not a state. And military wives and children were out there, and they wanted to get them out of that war zone, so they were bringing them back to the States. So we, 5 days, had duty on the lurleen, taking care of watching and taking care of those students. We hit San Francisco. He got a train, because we didn't have planes in those days. We took trains. He took a train through Texas to go to Pensacola. I took one through Denver to go to Pensacola. And we got stopped one day in our hometown to see our family. Went on to Pensacola, and we started the third week or fourth week in January, and that enlisted class. And we went 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, studied. I helped with all the navigation to the pilots. Other aviation ratings for enlisted, we were 30 men in one class. Helped us with the truss and the drag on the ships and what was caused the flight and everything else, and stalls and engines and radios and everything else. Of course, we all knew Morse code backwards. Quartermaster, I could stand on the bridge at that time and read signals light signals from another ship over here, and I'd give them to the captain before the signal crew brought them up even. But it was just like that, and we did that jerk. So anyway, we got our wings. Bill and Johnny and I all got our wings November 15th, 1942, from January 1st of February until November, in 9 months. And we had 350 hours flight time, night time, instrument time, and everything on those times. Well, Johnny went to a utility squadron, and Bill and I were sent from Pensacola to San Diego. We got to San Diego, and we were assigned to VP-11, which is PBY's. And they'd been in Kaneohe at Pearl Harbor, and then they came back, got new planes, and went to Guadalcanal and up. And they'd come back to the States to get new planes and reorganized. And so we got sent to VP-11, and Commander Campbell was our skipper. And so I went into Gordon Kennington's crew, and he went into another crew. And of course, at that time, Commander Pacific there in San Diego, and they said, well, we're going to hold you up a month, and because we're supposed to fly to Kaneohe. And they painted the PBYs all black. So we're the first Black Cat Squadron, VP-11, 12, 23. Painted us all black so we could fly all night long, so they couldn't see any signs of us or anything. And we left San Diego then, 12 of us, Commander Cliff Campbell. And Cliff Campbell called me out of Gordon Kennington's crew to be his co-pilot, because the co-pilots were the navigators at the time, and I'd been a quartermaster and everything. And we had 12 planes going out, so I went to his crew for the flight to Kaneohe. And we took off 5:30 at night and landed at 12:30 the next day, 19.7 hours, 19 and a half hours. So San Diego to Kaneohe at 8,000 feet. And all the planes made it to Kaneohe except 3 of them they were behind us, and they looked down, they saw Mauna Loa Mauna Kea in Hawaii, and they thought it was on Diamond Head, and they turned left and went on down to Hawaii and landed, ran out of gas and landed. And we went on into Kaneohe, but they had to gas up and fly back to Kaneohe then. And we were there at Kaneohe for 2 months. We flew out to Midway and helped the Air Force navigate on their, it was the Army Air Corps at that time, because they'd fly to Midway and go out and take a 100-mile crossing and come back in and miss the island. And so they didn't have the navigation, ocean navigation. So we went over there and we flew with them, and I flew with them and navigated and showed them how to navigate and look at the water and say it was 12 or 15 knots and to have 4 degrees drift or 5 degrees drift or whatever it was. And so they appreciated it. We were out there about 10 days was all and did about 10 flights, 12, 14-hour flights. came back to Honolulu, and we all took off VP-11 for Perth, Australia. Of course, it took us 6 days to fly from Kaneohe to Perth, Australia.
One of the questions I've always had, and I think that a lot of people in our general age group kind of have, is before the attack, before the Pearl Harbor attack, did you and your mates feel that war was coming with Japan? Did you guys think an attack was imminent, or was it a complete surprise?
Everybody knew that it was coming, just didn't know when. Even when I went home in November 1940, a year before, to my young sister's wedding, my older sister was going to Loretta Heights College. She's 2 years older than I am. And I was there for a couple of 3 days, and for her wedding and everything. And my older sister said, "Lois, I'm going into the convent. I'm going to be a nun, Loretta nun." And I said, "Oh, you are?" She says, "Yes." She says, "You're in the Navy and you're going to go to war, and somebody has to pray for you." And that was in November 1940. So everybody in the States knew that we were headed. Remember, the Japanese, that war didn't start there in Pearl Harbor. It started in 1932. The Japanese went through Korea. Korea at that time was one country. They went through Korea, Manchuria, and eastern China, all the way down the East China coast from 1932 to 1941. And they must have killed 5 to 7 million Chinese on the way down. And we knew that someday it was going to come. We had our fleet, Asiatic fleet, was based in the Philippines today, Manila, Pacific Bay. And we'd been out there for years, since 1905. When the 45 came into the Navy, the reason that came in was because the guerrillas of the 38s wouldn't get knocked down with one bullet. And they designed that in 1905, so it had 4,500 pounds of pressure there. And that's when we got the 45. It was so heavy. That 45, because in 1940, 41, we had practice at Bishop Point all the time. I was on the pistol team. And we knew one shot would knock you down. 4,500 pounds of pressure, one shot. And we had 7 shots in the clip, So we didn't need to do like today. They shoot 10, 15, 20 rounds just at somebody they're shooting at. They don't need one. These policemen and everything, what they need is more training with that gun, so they can just boom one shot and that's it. And they saved it. We were taught to save the rest of the ammunition because we might be behind the lines somewhere. We might need to keep it for months. So that's why we did it. Anyway.
So that morning of December 7th, what is the first thing you remember? Did you hear the first planes coming across?
When the first planes came across, the first ones hit Kaneohe. They came across the hill. When they came across the hill, it was immediately that we sounded general quarters. Everybody saw the Reds, and they knew immediately what it was. And their guns were firing within 30 seconds on the ships and on the beach.
So you guys were ready.
Well, we had 2 waves. The first wave did most of the damage because we had 8 battleships there, and they sunk those because that was the main part of the fleet. When the Nevada pulled out to head up the channel, all of the planes out of the hills headed for her because they wanted to sink her in the channel. They had closed the fleet off for 6 to 8 months till they got her out of there. And that's when the chief quartermaster beached her up there to Barber's Point. And then they were going to court-martial him because the captain hadn't told him to, but then they decided to give him the Stinger Service Cross because it was the best thing in the world. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so it happened. We came in and we shouldn't be in there. 8 battleships were in port. And the Utah was over there, and they reported they'd sunk a carrier. Well, the Utah in 1930s, the early 30s, had been taken. It was a battleship, and it was taken off the decks and put a platform there for landing. And there was a target ship after that for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years before Pearl Harbor. And it was moored over there. It's still there today because they sunk it. But the Japanese reported they sunk the carrier that was parked there, and it was the Utah. But we had 8 battleships in there, and every one of them were sunk. So if we'd have been to sea, a couple of us might have got sunk at sea. But the Japanese fleet that brought 3 carriers in there and battleships and cruisers and everything else from the north, they trained at the north end of Japan. They came across the north, south of Alaska and turned. December the 4th is when they sent their message that east wind rain that they were going to attack Pearl Harbor in 42 hours. Colonel Thorpe out of Indonesia got it and sent it to Roosevelt, and Roosevelt held it, and Kimmel and Short didn't get the telegram or the notice of it until 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon after the raid was over with. So it was, we all knew it. The minute the first plane came across, general quarters was sounded, the first guns were bumped, and the first wave was in and out in 15 minutes. You know, they don't spend too much time, but everything happens. And then the second wave came in 8:30, and that's when most of the Japanese got shot down. Was the second wave, and the ones that were shot down, you know, they had, I think, 365 planes come in there, and they lost 160 or something planes. But then they took off and got back to their carrier and went over past Midway and then up into Japan, and they got back to Japan when they anchored. So.
Wow, it's amazing. So I want to get back to where you were talking about after Pearl Harbor, and you went to Pensacola and flight school. So for the balance of the war, the next 4 years, where did you serve?
I served VP 11, Patrol Squad 11, from, you know, for the first couple of years. We left in January, last of January, 1st February of 1943, and went to Honolulu. We were there 2 months and went to Perth, Australia, which we went to 6 days. It took us 6 days to fly to Perth. We went to Johnson Island and Fiji and then Elu, Noumea, and Brisbane, Australia, and Adelaide, and then over to Perth. Perth's on the southwestern coast. And then we operated in the Indian Ocean out there, and then went north and operated out of Exmouth Gulf. And out of Exmouth Gulf, some of us, a couple of us, flew into the southern Philippines to pick up women and children that had gotten out of Manila and gotten south down into the jungle there, and they were protecting them. And we had to get them from the natives there. We had to pick them up, go in there and pick them up and get them back to Perth so they could come back to the States. And we fly out of Exmouth Gulf north, which was northwestern corner of Australia, up past Timor and Borneo, and we land at sea at 2 o'clock in the morning with a submarine and gas up. And then we go on into the southern Philippines there in the jungle and land and pick up 15, 16 people, take off, and go back to Exmouth Gulf and fly down to Perth, and they get off. And we did 2 or 3 flights there. First flight we did up there, and we took off and came in north of Timor there and circled about 3 times at 1:30 in the morning, and there was no submarine there for us, so we had to go back to 8,000 feet and go all in, and we ran out of gas, 23.5 hours in the air. We ran out of gas going into the Exmouth Gulf and landed, and they towed us in, gassed us up, and we took off and flew on down to Perth and dropped the people off.
I want to skip ahead to when the war ended in August of '45. What were your thoughts? I mean, obviously you experienced so much at that point.
Well, when we came back to the States, I was, first of all, Leo Nuss and Newbie and myself picked out a crew of PBYs and went to, we had, 2,500 nighttime hours in twin engine. And they sent us to Washington, D.C., and we picked up some PBNs down in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, out of the Naval Aircraft Factory there. Had red stars on them, flew from Elizabeth City to San Diego to Oak Harbor and up to Kodiak, Alaska, and gave them to the Russians. They were Lend-Lease, but all across the country we had red stars on it. We didn't have Americans. And came back from there, and I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida for F-7 training because twin-engine night fighters, first ones that came out, because we had so much twin-engine nighttime in. And I went to the bar one night, didn't have a drink, in the officers' club, because in New Guinea, back in 43, when we were at New Guinea, we got shot down in September 43 and December 43, but right after that, we got called in one night. Beale and I came in from a 13-and-a-half-hour all-night flight and going into debrief and breakfast, and Cliff Campbell, our CO, came in and said, Beale, you and Conter come up to the wardroom and have breakfast, your ensigns. I went from first-class quartermaster with wings to AP to naval aviation pilot to ensign. So we started, that's how I got my commission. And so when we came back to the States, I was JG, and I was sent down to Jacksonville, Florida for F-7. And Steve Johnson was our executive. He'd made captain. He was commander in PBYs, and he made captain, sent back. And there he walked in. Lou, how are you doing? And everything. Because he was with me the 2 times we got shot down. And also, December the 19th, we had made the rescue at Sepik River. We had rescued 219 Coast Watchers, which are the Australian Coast Watchers. And they're like our SEALs today. They were behind the lines intelligence with Morse code radios to send intelligence back of where the ships and the movements, and the Japanese had surrounded them up the Sepik River, about 100 miles in from WWII, at the tribes are there, and they were going to behead him. So General George C. Kenney, who was the Army Air Corps, then in Port Moresby, asked if we couldn't try to get him out of there because they couldn't get boats in or anything. So we flew in there 3 days. 4 of us crews flew in there, about 15, 16 at a time. The Sepik River was just like this up that thing. We had 15 to 20 feet on each side of our wingtips going up the river to our trees. We'd land, they'd load up, we'd jump into the clouds to get out of there because the fighters were on us. We go up to 9,000 feet, 9,500 feet, our maximum, and do 180 degrees then. We'd fly for an hour and 15 to 20 minutes, and there were 2 peaks there, and we hadn't hit a peak. And so we'd start letting down on the south side and go to Port Moresby and drop them off. And in 3 days, we rescued 219 without any casualties or anything. So we did, that was in December. And then I came back to the States and did the Russian flight up there for the PBNs. And I was sent down to Jacksonville for F-7, and I was in a bar and having a drink, and Steve Johnson walked in and said, "What are you doing, Lou?" And I said, "We're leaving in 10 days and going out to the carrier in the Philippines." He says, "You're what?" He says, "You're not going anywhere." He says, "I was just sent in here for assignment officer." He says, I'm a captain now, and I'm in charge of giving orders and where the guys are going. He says, "You'll be out of that in 2 days." In 2 days, 3 days, I was out of that squadron. And at Lake City, Florida, as commanding officer of TDD Unit Number 1, which were drones. It was some of the first drones the Navy had. And so I flew Twin Beaches we had a little box there with a stick on it. They call us pecker pilots because they had a little stick there, and we'd fly. We'd take the drone off on the next runway and fly around and come back and land. And they were going to use the drones to fly into the targets so they wouldn't have pilots get shot down. And we were only there a couple of months, a month and a half, and they had a lot of PVs there in and out of there, so they was getting tangled up. So they transferred my squadron to Norman, Oklahoma. And I said, "Norman, Oklahoma?" I said, "There's no water around there. That's not the Navy." This was first part of 1945. And went to Norman, Oklahoma, and there was a Naval Air Station there, and I took the TDU in there. And that's where I was in August when they dropped the atomic bombs, and the end of the war in September. So that was World War II for me. But Truman, last year, before the 75th anniversary, 3 Japanese reporters came here at the house. And they wanted to talk to me about Pearl Harbor. They said that they were going to meet Obama, the Prime Minister was going to meet Obama the last week in December in Honolulu, and they wanted to see if he was going to apologize to them for dropping the atomic bomb. And I said, hell no, he's not going to apologize. I hope he isn't. I said the Prime Minister of Japan should thank him for us dropping the atomic bomb, because we only killed 200,000 Japanese and the war was over. And if we would have gone on, we were training 1.5 million men to land there in November 1945, and we would have lost probably 500,000, but in doing that, we'd have had to level the whole area before we landed, and probably 5 to 7 million Japanese would have gotten killed. So we saved 7 million lives by dropping the atomic bomb. So tell him to thank you. And they, I never did get a copy of the. They were here for 2 hours taking pictures and to give to the Japanese and release. But of course, there was never any apologize or thank you or anything else the week that Obama went to the memorial last December after the 75th anniversary. So anyway, I got ahead of myself, but I wanted to tell you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. After the war, did you stay in the Navy? It tells me here that you served in the Korean War as well. Did you stay in the Navy all the way through the Korean War?
No, and I got married, and my father-in-law was a big builder in Southern California, and my wife was a graduate of USC, and they said, boy, if you can get out and go, you need a college education to go to work, so, because I only had a high school education. And so in January 46, I got out, and I went to USC and signed up, and if I'd have waited 2 months later, the Navy decided to send all the enlisted pilots to college for 3.5 years to get their degree, and you had to do 5 years afterwards. But what the heck? You were in that long anyway. But I was at USC, so 46 and 7, I was taking business administration at USC, and I was vice president of Loftus Land Company and Sunshine Water Company and so forth. But in 48, I was called in and went to Washington, D.C. to intelligence school then. And when I got to intelligence school, and then after that, I went to international relations, then to ABC school, which is Atomic, Biological, and Chemical Warfare School. And my wife walked in the office one day and said, "What's this?" I looked at a telegram, reported immediately San Diego for duty. Korean War, 25th of June in 1950. That night I was in San Diego in Carrier Group 102 as intelligence officer of the Air Group. And nothing to do about it. So we did our training and did everything, and I went, we had 2 F4U squadrons, 1 AD squadron, and 1 F9 squadron, first F9 squadron. And I was flying AD, so we left San Diego in May of 51 for Korea, April 51. And we got to Korea and did 7 months till December of 51 there. And halfway through, they grounded me because I was in intelligence in the air group and knew too much, they said. And so when I came back to December of 51, I was only full lieutenant then, because I had made lieutenant in 46 or something. And San Diego, and 2 months later, my mother-in-law said, "I want you out of the Navy," and I said, "I can't get out." And she says, she wrote a letter to Secretary of the Navy, and he wrote a letter back that I was a critical rank and the only one in that category, and he let her know, but I could put in for it, and when he decided when to let me out. Well, anyway, the next week, I came up from San Diego to L.A., and I was handed divorce papers from my mother-in-law. And in February of 52, went to court, and had a woman judge in L.A. I mean, Henry was there with her attorney, my ex-wife, and we had 3 boys by then, Tony, Michael, and John. I didn't think that they would give a divorce, and she didn't want one. Anyway, I was standing there in uniform, and after a lot of talk, the judge said, I want to ask you a question here. He said, who's paying for this divorce? And Henrietta says, I am. And she said, I thought so. Anyway, divorce was granted. And I went back to San Diego, and as soon as I was divorced, I got a call from Du Bois in L.A., Naval Intelligence Office. He says, Lou, I'm getting you transferred up here. We have a special job for you. A girl up at Point Magoo walked away with $10,000, $12,000 in Navy money. 11th Naval District said, don't know how it happened or anything, but we want you to go up there and be assistant communications officer and find out what the score is. So anyway, I was transferred from San Diego from Air Group to Point Magoo as assistant communications officer. Hell, I didn't know one telephone from the other, but I went in there, reported to Young, and I got a desk, and had my telephone, and had it hooked up and found out, and so I could listen to all the conversations. And finally, she was the girl that was taking in. At that time, they had civilian Douglas and everything else working there at the Missile Test Center, and they'd pay her in cash or in check for monthly, but for their telephones. We had 4 banks of telephones in, and big banks of computers, and I had a little incident there, and came in from the Naval Academy, and we went through. I showed him around, and he says, I said, where'd you go to school? And he says, well, I graduated from the academy, and I graduated 3 years at MIT and master's degree in engineering. And he said, where'd you go? And I said, Wheat Ridge High School. It was funny, but we had fun. And so it took me about 3 months to figure out how she'd take the cash from these telephones. As on the way to the bank, she'd have a separate deposit slip and take $500 or $600 out of it and take it on herself. And she was going with a guy who was married and had 2 kids in Oxnard, and she was married and had 2 kids. And I felt bad about it, real bad. But finally, I went to the bank and got this proof and everything. I called Du Bois in and said, here's this. And he said, go pack your bags and be ready to go, because within an hour you'll have orders out to Washington. I want you to get lost for 30 days on the way to Washington. So anyway, I took off that afternoon in my car, and I packed my bags and took off, went to Washington, picked up my young sister and her husband. It was up at the university there in Pullman, and took them through Grand Junction, my dad and mother's, and I reported into Washington, D.C. 3 weeks later. And the next morning, Du Bois in with a woman that came in, and they walked in the office and told Clyde that they wanted to talk to the secretary. And as soon as she walked in the office, she started crying because she knew that she was caught. And I guess she got divorced and spent 2 years or 3 years at Hatcher in prison, and it was a sorrowful mess. But it had to happen. So anyway, I got back to the East Coast and went to 5th Fleet. They sent me up to 5th Fleet. And I got up there, and the admirals, I flew, they're talking about the Russians busting into our communications and doing stuff for the election. They're wasting millions of dollars on nothing, and all these investigations and everything of the Russians. Back in those days, when I went to the 5th Fleet, the admiral said, Lewis said, I want you to go up to Kepler. We had 3 planes up at Iceland, PVs, P2Vs. He said, you up there and fly. I said, somewhere or other the Russians are getting into our telephone cable and listening to our conversation. I went to Keflavik, rode in the right seat of the PV with the pilot on the other side, and I was a pilot too, and I said to the guys, now we're going out over the North Sea, north of Scotland, and you fly with a Russian fishing fleet. They got 15, 20 boats there, fishing boats. You go down to 50 feet off the water, and you can see that 4 or 5 of them, the guys are just standing at attention. They're spotless. There's no lines. They're all coiled up and everything else. The other fishermen, they got really looking up at you, and they're working like heck. So I went down 50 feet, took pictures of these, and they're the Russian soldiers. And they had divers down, and they were diving to the international cable. They're cutting into it and listening to the conversations. And that was the early 50s, for God's sakes. And so came back and reported the admiral. And then Guatemala came up on their friend. And then he sent me over to Fort Bragg, North Carolina with the Army Special Forces. I went through training of their Special Forces with Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Charlie Norton and Herbie Brucker and Caesar. Caesar's the only one still living, I think, down in Tampa, Florida. And they became Green Berets, and Kennedy made them Green Berets, but they were Special Forces. I went through in 53. So I did that, and as soon as I got back to Norfolk, I was made the first SERE officer in the Navy, SERE. And that's survival and evasion escape, resistance to interrogation, and espionage. And after that, my job was to set up schools around the world and train pilots and air crewmen how to live if they got shot down, how to live in the jungles, how to evade and escape. Because remember, 35% of the world is jungles. And our men were more afraid of the jungles than they were the Japanese. It was hard. If you don't know how to live in the jungles, you're dead in a minute. And then prisoner war administration and espionage. And so I set up schools in Panama and Brunswick, Maine, and 29 Palms and Warner Springs and Honolulu, and we trained pilots and air crewmen. Jim Stockdale came out in Pendleton. I had one in Pendleton, a 10-day school. In 58, that's after I went to Naval War College. They sent me to Naval War College in 58, and I came back from that, and I went to Pendleton. I was officer in charge of this exercise. And we had an air group out of Miramar come up, but this commander walked into my office. I was officer in charge of the whole exercise. And he said, "Louis, I'm from Washington, personnel, Navy Department." He was a Navy pilot, full commander. And he said, "We've got a lot of reports from mothers and fathers and senators that your schools are too damn hard on them. Their guys are losing 10 or 15 pounds in 10 days. And I said, "Well, maybe they should have lost it beforehand." But anyway, he said, "So they sent me out to go through this school of yours and just to see and report back to them." So I said, "Okay. Don't tell them who I am." So I put them in the north end. I had 4 Green Berets come out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We dropped them in the north end of Pendleton. And when Pendleton had 235 Marines for aggressor forces, and we built a POW camp. And so the Green Berets led them down through the barbed wire and everything else, and we'd capture them. And so we captured Jim and brought him in, put him in the pits, run the water through the pits and everything, and some guys, those pits, you lay them down there, you run the water, and they'll 4 or 5 hours later, they'll look at you and say, "Kiss my fanny." And some guys will be in there 15 minutes, and they'll start crying and going to pieces. They can't take it. So anyway, we had him in those pits and everything, so finally the interrogator was a colonel the 4 interrogators were out of Army, Air Force, Colorado Springs, the AISS, which is intelligence squadron for the Air Force interrogators. And this colonel said, "Lou, that guy is not in that squadron, I can tell." Well, anyway, the next morning I introduced him. He said it was the best training he'd ever had in his life, and it was worth it, because they thought they were Congressmen thought they were spending too much money, that the guys could learn this off of computers. I said, "You can't even get a guy hungry in 10 days, for God's sakes. You got to get him hungry to make him live in the jungles." So anyway, he went back to Washington in 58, 59, and said the report was good. 60, 61, he had his time up in Pentagon, and they made him commanding officer of an air group, and he went to the South Pacific. And then Vietnam came along, and he was shot down, in 64 or 5 and became a POW just a year before McCain. And he made vice admiral in a prison camp. He was 7 years in the POW camp in Vietnam. 72, I retired in 67 and went to Palm Springs and everything. And he got rescued in 72 because 65 I went to Honolulu and wrote the SEER program for Vietnam. And I saw all the girls coming in and everything. And I told the admiral I was retiring. And anyway, I retired in 67. He got captured. He got rescued in 72. And when he came back, he landed in Travis. He made a vice admiral in prison camp, you know. He was a senior one at Hanoi, over McCain and everything. He called me personally on the phone. He got my phone number and called me at home and said, I want to thank you, Lou, for being so damn tough and giving me such tough training, because that saved my life. I could have never lived that long in that condition with the food and the beatings and everything else without knowing what was going on. And I said, thank you very much. I'm glad if I saved one person, I'm happy. And we had McCain go into Battle, Germany in one of our 7-day schools there. On the way over, he was Lieutenant J.G. But he's never really come through, and I knew his father was an admiral. Never come through and said, well, that training was tough, you know, and good. But the men have to have that training, and Washington is 100% wrong when they say that they closed Stead Air Force Base, which is the Army Air Corps school. Colonel Jack Kupsik was in charge of it. It was a 21-day school, and it was really a great school. And I've gone through it twice, and I've sent men through it many times. But they decided they're spending too much money. And in 1950, 61 or 2, Jack called me and said, come up here, Lou. It's Reno. We got some senators coming in here and representatives. I flew up, and they were there, and we had tents. When the guys would come in there, we had tents, and we put 30 in a tent. And outside toilets, outside showers. It was perfect for POW camp. And they said it was the greatest training they'd ever seen. They went back to Washington and appropriated $10.5 million to build a 3-story barracks there with rooms on each side. So while the guys were in ground school there the first 10 days, they could live comfortably. And I said, God, they don't need that. Well, anyway, that was only open. They only had it there for 3 years. They decided, oh, they're spending too much money on training. So they closed that school and sent Jack and all of them up to Fairchild by Spokane for a 4-day school. The guys get on the computers. And I said, you can't teach a guy that in 4 days. And you can't teach him in 10 days. You get him hungry to teach him anything about survival. But anyway, the congressmen don't understand that, and the mothers and dads don't understand it. But Jim Stockdale did, and he knew what was going on. And I said, thank you very much. So that's where he ended. I retired in 67, 28 years.
Before we finish up, I definitely just want to hear your thoughts on what service has meant to you, what service to this country has meant to you in your life. And so, yeah, if you could just let us know what that.
This is my Pearl Harbor hat, Sawyer's hat.
Can you hold it up for the camera? A little higher, a little higher. There you go. Perfect.
It's got USS Arizona, BB-39 on one side. It's got my wings and my medals on the other side. Distinguished Flying Cross. That was from the 5th Air Force, rescuing the 219. And I got 3 personal accommodations with stars on it for combat. And we got the President's Citation from President Roosevelt. We were the first squadron in the Navy to get it. So, and the rest of them are all area defense, American defense, America, all that stuff and everything. So I use this hat to brief the high school kids in Pearl Harbor in World War II. And the high school kids really love it. Well, that was my main life, you know. The first 27 years was serving in the United States and helping keep peace in the world. And I was highly trained. I went through many schools, ABC school, atomic, biological, chemical, international relations, terrorism at Naval War College, and operations and plans at the Naval War College at Newport. I had a lot of training, and I was happy to have it because it helped me train the other people who were going to be in the front lines. And when we were on the front lines, it helped save my survival. I was one of the first survival officers, one of the first SEER officers in the Navy, and survival long before that. In 1943, when my daughter was telling me, we got shot down one night in a PBY. We carried 12, 14 parachute flares in the waist hatch. There were 250,000 candle power. And we'd go out and at 1:30 in the morning, 2:30, 3:30, we'd fly over 1,500 feet and throw a couple of them out and keep light on the Japanese ground positions and keep them awake all night for a week or 10 days, and they'd be weak when our men would go in and fight them. And we went out the third week in September of 43, and up alongside the New Guinea, about 7, 8 miles offshore, we got shot at, and a bullet went through the waist hatch and exploded one of these parachute flares. And of course, I was in the right-hand seat, and Gordon Kenny was in the left hand. We had to land immediately in the open sea. We landed, and everybody came forward and closed the hatch, so everything was on fire from the back. And we had 2,000 pounders and 2 500s under the wing when we landed. We hadn't dropped them. It was just an hour before dark. And they all got out the pilot's escape hatch. And Gordon Kennington was our senior pilot. He was a lieutenant. And he said to the guys, we didn't get any life jackets or lifeboats. And he said, you guys say your prayers because we're 7 miles offshore. It's an hour till dark, and I don't think any of us can swim that long until we can get into shore. And I said, bull. I said, get together and hold hands and tread lightly. And because the plane was shifting away and the machine guns were firing all those 50 calibers over the water. And I said, hold hands. If guys get tired, hold them to 2 on each side, hold them up. And so it was about 30 minutes, and it was getting darker, and one of our other PBYs was way over on the horizon, saw us on fire, and came back over there. By the time he got over there, we'd been in the water 30 to 40 minutes, treading water. And the guy didn't say one word after I told him to shut up and do this. And I was first-class petty officer at that time. I hadn't got my commission yet. The PBY circled us, saw we didn't have a lifeboat, and dropped one of theirs. We carried 2 10-man lifeboats in the PBYs. Dropped it out. Of course, they couldn't inflate it because it was flowing all the way. So, and I swam out and got it, landed a little ways away from us, that open sea. And in Pensacola, training is hard as hell. To turn one of those lifeboats over in the water is just practically impossible. And I grabbed that thing, and I inflated that thing, and I flipped it over, and I dove into it. And I said, how in the hell did I get into here? Anyway, we back and got all the other 9 guys. We got into the beach at about 2:33 in the morning, at dark, all night long, and got into New Guinea. And I got them hidden in the forest. And TD4 and I, who was my plane captain, watched the patrols come by and everything, kept the guys quiet, told them don't even make one sound. And the next night, a PT boat, I listened to it about midnight, and I said to TD, I said, that's a PT boat. So we went out in the boat there and got within 100 feet of it, and had those 50 calibers pointing at us. I said, turn those GD guns away from us. And so they said, that's Conter, come on aboard. We went aboard, and they had 3 UDT men aboard. And they wouldn't let me leave and go back and get the other guys. They said, no, we're going in here. So I briefed them exactly where they were, and names and everything. They were in and back in 45 minutes with all other 8 men. And we got in that PT boat, headed south full speed, got into the Half Moon. We were operating off Half Moon in San Pablo, and we got in the next morning and went to breakfast, debriefed, slept that night, later on the next day, and the next night at 5:30 took another PBY out for a 13.5-hour mission. That's how it was in those days. That's what she was talking about, rescuing those men. We had all, and Gordon Kennington's daughter down told my ex-wife before she died. I said, "Well, said, wasn't for Lou, I wouldn't be here." So he saved Dad's life and all the guys' life. He said, "'Cause I wasn't born yet." And so I said, "That's good." So we're still good friends. She lives down in Rockland.